Well, hello there, everybody. Yes, we are a little late, but it is okay. Had some technical issues. My fault, but hey, I was just excited to be able to talk to Dr. Lynn. And so here we are. So, welcome, everybody. Thank you for your patience and staying with us. The delay is now good, and here we are live. So, welcome everybody. As you know, I always like just to speak favor over us all. You can always use a little bit more favor in your life. And we thank you for tuning in. We know you have a lot of different places you can go, and it is an honor to have you here. So, most of y'all who are with me when I'm here at the normal time, we call this the Soul Tribe family, Dr. Lynn, by the way. Um, Y'all know that I have been really excited about this with our guest, and we've got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So I'm going to be diligent and well focused and just start with our guest. So, our guest is Dr. Heather Lynn, and allow me to read I have to read it because it is an impressive bio. So, Dr. Lynn is an author, historian, and renegade archaeologist. Heather, we're going to have to talk about that a little bit. Known for investigating forbidden history, lost knowledge, and the hidden forces shaping civilization. She is a frequent guest on the History Channel's Ancient Aliens and the host of the Midnight Academy podcast, link left below. Think about subscribing. And she brings the academic insight into a fearless curiosity to the questions not only do scholars have, and have to be void of, but how the rest of us like to find some answers. In her latest book, which has come in February, The Anunnaki Revelation, it traces humanity's secret relationships with advanced knowledge from Sumerian gods to the Silicon Valley elites. Told y'all. So, having said that, Dr. Lynn, welcome. It is an honor to have you. And again, I'm as excited as a kid in a candy store.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I hope that I live up to that bio. So,
Oh, it's, it's as they would say, it's, impressive. I mean, because I am a fan of Ancient Aliens. Um,
it's a divisive show. Some people love it, some people hate it.
yeah, they really
Um,
do,
yeah, they do. They do. I happen to. I'm an apologist for it, big time. I'm actually flying out there next week to do the next season. Looking forward to it. I have been involved in a lot of different pilots and opportunities where people have asked, "Hey, would you be on the show, or could we make a show out of this book, or whatever?" And I've just had a distaste for anything Hollywood. I used to live in Los Angeles. I'm not really big into that. So the irony of me being on Ancient Aliens for so long does not escape me. However, I always try to tell people I know them personally. I can't vouch for everyone personally, but I know from my interactions that they're really trying to do a good job entertaining, obviously, and then also bringing light to some of these different ideas. And so they really like to have a diverse group of people come on and share those ideas. And they themselves have been victims, so to speak, of ridicule and threats, even just for having the guts to put these topics on the air. And so they're good people. Everybody that goes on there, they're just their own people. So they don't really, everybody has a platform there to speak. And so the show itself is just sort of offering that. And I usually go on and I've never once been censored. They don't ask me to say things. I literally just get to say what I want. And it's been the only production that hasn't recut my words and done something tricky. And so I always have to put that out there because I've been told, oh, you're just like one of them then. And it's like, no, 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 but I get it. I would think that too if I were on the other side. Like that's a mainstream show, but again, it's just a way to get the word out.
Yeah,
And plus it's fun. At the end of the day, it's good fun. Good show.
and it's informative.
Yeah.
So
You reach people where they are,
the
you know.
question I have for you is, how did you get started in this? I mean, number one, history for most people is a very dry, boring subject. Archaeology is, again, one of those things that most people don't think about. How did you get started in that?
Well, that's a can of worms. So let me just, I'll make a
I
long
love
story.
fishing.
Right? I'll make a long story short as I can. I actually hated history. It was quite boring. I was a musician, so I played a lot of instruments. I still play in a few orchestras. I play the French horn, etc. So I was a very good student, and I was going to get music scholarships and this sort of thing. But unfortunately, I came from a very bad background. My mother and family bad situation. So I ended up leaving home at 16 years old, never been back, and I dropped out of school, was homeless, and traveled the country on a what I would call at the time a spiritual quest. So I started visiting all sorts of churches. I came from a Catholic background, but I was ready to like see the world, and I was doing van life before van life was like a thing with these kids. So I was out there living like a hippie and trying to find myself and just actually trying to survive. After a while, that gets to be kind of old because you do have to literally survive, and it's not a fun time being homeless. But over lots of, adventures, we'll say, misadventures, I wanted to go back to school, and it was really important to me to venture into that. My mother had passed away. I never got to reconcile. So I was just a loner. I was a vagabond, if you will. And I knew that I wanted to go back to school. And so I went to the local community college and I just started doing the right thing. I took business courses in general ed, and I did take a course that was about, well, just art history for the most part. I submitted a paper, and that professor really complimented my ideas. And it was just that little nugget that, like a stereotype, but true. A professor who saw something a little more in me encouraged me. And I thought, oh, wow. And I had an interest in sort of alternative topics to begin with. And that stemmed from all the time that I was out in the Mojave Desert by myself. And this was before podcasts. So I had the radio. And I was that one who'd stay up late at night listening to Art Bell.
Yeah.
And I used to get out of the car and listen, turn it way up in the middle of nowhere and look at that giant sky. And I hear these wild people talking about wild things. And I think, man, I would give anything to be able to be in a position to just talk to people like this. I never knew anyone so interesting. And I thought that would be cool. Well, the cool part about that is God works in mysterious ways because one of the first things I ever did was I went on to Coast to Coast, one of many appearances, and very full circle moment because I had become one of those so-called interesting, eccentric people. But that was after a long slog of going to school and basically switching my major to follow my dream. I didn't know it was a dream. I didn't have the outcome. I just wanted an opportunity to follow what it was that I felt that I was interested in. I was lucky and grateful to have the support of professors to do that. So I got my associates and the bachelor's, and I studied archaeology. I worked in archaeology, and then I ended up getting a master's in history and a doctorate in comparative religion, but also a doctorate in education, and just ended up working again as a professor at a community college because I wanted to do that same thing for people. I wanted to see the potential in someone else and sort of bring them up. But
Pass it on.
yeah, and so I sort of stopped doing that for a bit because the school climate is very different now, and I ended up I currently am a museum director, and so I'm still in that world, so to speak. But the real thing that got me into this was probably like in my undergraduate program, one of the very first courses I had in archaeology. The first day, the first assignment, they put names on the board of particular archaeologists, and they were like, "All right, well, one of the assignments is to pick one of these names and go after their theory and debunk it." And I thought, okay, sure, why not? And then I looked and I recognized a few of those names because, fan of Coast to Coast. So I heard Michael Cremo was on there. And I thought, okay, that's fine, but I'm not really sure why we're jumping right out to that. I don't know what I'm doing. We just got the syllabus. So over time, it became apparent to me that it was because it was said as such that the American Anthropological Association was very much interested in not just best practices and ethics, but reputation management, that much of this had to do with reputation management. And I got really disenchanted because as I was working in the program, I ended up working doing grants. And again, this was a small time state school. And I found so much corruption and I was disenchanted a bit, and everybody else was too. And they were like, "Oh, you like ancient Egyptian things? Yeah, we all do. Like, get in line." It was just something. And then the corruption part really got to me. It was just good old fashioned waste, fraud, and abuse, where I was working hard to get a grant for the research institute, and I secured the grant. And I was so happy. And they were like, well, okay, great, but this isn't for the project because I thought we were going to be funding a project. And they said, no, this is just so that we have a few extra bucks over the summer when we don't teach. And I was like, not to mention all of the galas and events that I had gone to where literally there was a chocolate fountain and all of this. And it was weird. And I never fit in really well because I was really excited about the past. And you'd think I was in the right place, but I got reprimanded for I was at the museum and I had like archaeology day where I had to pass like flyers out to the students to get them interested. And I was reprimanded for the print because it said it looked too fun. It looked more like sensationalist. And I said, well, you have to meet people where they are. They're interested in the topics, pull them in, capture their attention, and let's teach. But nope, because again, reputation management. They wanted to be taken seriously like they were hard science when, they are a soft science. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it is something to kind of note that they were more about reputation management than anything else. And so I got disenchanted again. And I actually emailed Michael Cremo and I was like, I'm a undergraduate student and I'm about ready to just like blow this popsicle stand and what do I do? And I didn't even think he'd write back because he could have been just the biggest A-list celebrity in my view. I was nobody. I was formerly homeless, so I was surprised though he emailed back pretty soon and he gave me the best advice. It was so much more than just, oh, that's nice. Thank you for reading my books or something. It was he took the time to really lay out my options. And I had no guidance. I didn't have a dad or a mom or anybody. It's just me at this point. And that really like meant something to me. And he gave me sound advice. He said, you can stay in academia and you won't be able to go so far out there. You'll have to push the envelope in small but meaningful ways. If you leave, you can do anything you want, explore anything you want, but you'll be lacking the credentials and the credibility, but also the actual education, which is more important than credentials. Who cares what things are after your name? If you don't know something, it's the knowledge that you need. And I thought, all right, okay, because he's like talking me off the ledge like any responsible adult would do. And I said, okay, here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to continue my education, and I'm just going to look at this as like I'm a double agent. I'm going to learn because how can you argue against something if you don't even know what the other side thinks? So I calmed down and I took my pre 25-year-old brain and put it back in and said, okay, calm down, discipline. And then that was that. And I always knew I'm going to use these tools. These are legitimate scientific tools, but I'm going to apply them, this methodology, to trying to look into these alternative so-called ideas. And let's see what happens. And that's what I've been doing since. The Anunnaki part, though, that was kind of an accident. And
Yeah,
it was,
because
yeah.
typically history is pretty sterile. They seem to want to have a very chronological set of events.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everything has to be neatly tied up in a bow so
Thank
that
you.
it can be regurgitated and repeated in such a way that we can memorize it as opposed to understand it. And that's part of the problem. It's a message system. So again, when it comes down to this idea of the hard science component of it, archaeology in particular they'll use like hard science tools, but at the end of the day, the analysis still has to be a level of quantified analysis. So there has to be like a qualitative lens and a quantitative lens, mixed methodology. People just don't seem to want to talk about that because here's the thing: if I see stuff from the past, even if I have been able to take an artifact and measure it and understand, what it's made of, how long it's been there, et cetera, I still have to interpret that. And I have tools around me and frameworks and methodologies I can apply, but it's still coming through me and my mind and how I put the story together. It's a story, it's history. So that leaves room for error and it leaves room for manipulation, but it also leaves room for creativity. And that's not a bad thing. That's like Newtonian. Newton, we love to think of him as this like father of just science, and he was. But he was only able to do that because he thought boldly. And much of his research was in alchemy and magic and religion. And he was trying to find the end times date. And he was doing more esoteric work than anything else. And we conveniently like to forget about that. But it's that desire to know the unknown, that creative and bold expression that launches us into the risks that we have to take to study things and then observe and measure it. If we're discouraged from doing any of that because we're just there to repeat the findings, and stay in our lane and only repeat the talking points, we're no longer in a system of learning or understanding. We're just parroting things back. And then you have to question, well, why? Well, in
Yeah,
my
wow.
view, it's just simply control.
You mentioned we were talking before we went live that two and I find them disciplines and how they're so polar opposites, but yet they're so connected, history and occult.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think of a historian, I don't think of occultism, but yet seems like they're more connected than we realize.
Yeah, really, this is the thing. When you hear about a cult generally means just hidden. It's occulted. So like oculus, this is about the eye. So you don't see it. If you have a blood clot, they'll say your vein has been occluded. It's closed. So when something's occulted, it just means that it's sort of hidden. Doesn't mean it's not there. It's the same as esoteric. It's the internal working, not the exoteric. So as long as we've had history, which is simply the written narrative. That and history begins in Sumer, quite literally, because they were the ones who started writing things down. Now, whether or not there was a pre-Sumerian civilization with writing, I mean, who knows, right? But as of right now, we don't have any evidence of that. So we have to say at this point that all history begins at Sumer. Anything before that's prehistory because history references the documentation, not artifacts, but the documentation. So, with that said, you have parallel documentation. You have the sort of accepted consensus view of things, which is the official history. Then you have everything else. And so sometimes some of that should just be everything else because it's not relevant or it's whatever. But other times it's purposefully put forth as a sort of subtext or it's rejected knowledge or it's something completely different. But it has a long history that coincides. It's like the shadow of history. So everything occult is basically going as far back as history, at least. And occult, again, it's very important to point out that it doesn't mean evil. Now, of course, that's anything in the shadows can definitely breed evil because you're being secretive. However, if you say something's occult or this is the occult, it's easy to just conjure up an idea of a young kid going to hot topic, wearing all black and all of that. But that's that exoteric thing, and that actually serves an agenda very well because you don't see then the true occult workings in front of you because it doesn't look like what you're expecting or what the media said. So it does come back around because, again, we're talking about control of narratives, things like mind control. History is mind control. I mean, just even at its most innocent,
Mhm.
because what you're trying to do is say, this is my idea and understanding of what happened. You weren't there, or maybe you were there, but I'm going to still tell you how I perceive it. I'm telling you my story. And that's going in your head, and you're either accepting it or you're adding to it. You're sharing a narrative. It's storytelling, which is like a form of mind control. So, in the polar
Interesting.
like spectrum of it, you have the occult, it's definitely a form of mind control, but for what end? It's looking at the motives then too, as to psychology, therapy, mind control, entertainment, mind control. All of this is an attempt to sort of adjust or however how you think. So whether or not the ends are good, I mean, those are the questions we get into.
As an historian, when George Smith made his discovery there in the late 19th century, I guess, with the discovery of the Sumerian tablets, cylinders, how much of an impact did that have on the status quo of what history was perceived prior to the revelation of this society, this culture of people that was hidden, but yet known about it? I mean, I studied the Old Testament, and in the book of Zechariah, Sumer was mentioned, but it was never talked about. So I'm curious from your perspective, when we discovered the tablets and they began to tell this story, how did the status quo handle that?
Well, they had a hard time with it, and it
They
depends on,
did.
they really did because they didn't know how to, I guess, weave it into the overall narrative because it
Yeah.
defied the narrative at this point in very key areas. It mostly having to do again with the ultimate agenda of controlling. So, for instance, it was a very Christian mindset, a very specifically Christian mindset, saying we have to follow this linear progression, follows the Bible, etc. But then what happens when you find these texts that actually date further back, but they depict things like a Noah's Ark story. or things that are in the Old Testament, but they place the timing of it so far back and then also elaborate on it a little bit more in ways that are often not so moral in their teaching. So, if you look at those ancient gods, they were not doing godlike things. They were doing very human things, very inappropriate things. And that's a very hard thing to put into your narrative about like a great and loving God that has all of these great laws and who's ultimately just. Because if you look at those pagan gods, they're very unjust. And so that's hard. How do you rectify that? Where do you place them in the story? Are they outside of the Bible? That would be convenient, but you can't do that because, like you said, the areas are mentioned in the Bible. And so, and in the Bible, when they have had written those texts like later and interpreted these things later, they were doing things retroactively. They didn't actually understand. So when they say like Moses is from like Ur, they're putting that together later, like it's in retrospect. And so they really
Yeah.
didn't even know what that religion, so to speak, would be. So when it said that Moses goes and he has his own religion, but he goes out into the desert and follows a different religion than his people, that they didn't understand what that could be yet. And but they write the story because this is scribed, so that these are the documents. But then later, when they find evidence to support the story overall, but then also to add things to it that may or may not be beneficial to their Christian narrative, it becomes a point of need to know basis. So they didn't hide it per se. They just didn't advertise it, which they felt they had not any point to do so. They were, oh, we'll understand it, we'll study it, but we're not going to have a mass campaign like we would now with like the Daily Mail and a clickbait headline that says,
Yeah.
that we don't find that. So they didn't do anything. It was lie by omission, and only the elites were able to study it.
And that brings me to the next question is that why, all right, I don't know if that they say because of the human genome that humans are hybrids, but the question that has always puzzled me, why such an intelligent species as Homo sapiens are, why is it we can't remember where we came from? Or what is the purpose here? It seems to be hidden and it almost seems to be deliberate.
Right. No, that's true. And I think even by the people themselves. And so you'll hear other authors like Graham Hancock, most notably, say that we're a species with amnesia, and that is true. But I kind of add to it with my own theory, which is we're a species with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm,
So if you have PTSD, quite literally in a clinical sense, if you have PTSD, you often then have problems with your memory. You can either, for protection, you black it out or what have you. It does. It's there's a whole brain structure at play here where heightened stress, like very bad trauma, does absolutely affect your memory, both in, the one way of forgetting something or like in post-traumatic stress, you'll be heightened aware to it so that you'll remember never to do that again, never get near that. That can go and pathologize into a phobia, etc. So this link to amnesia, but also memory at the same time, or fear-based response, is quite evident clinically. Now, why that's important is when you consider how far back we go and some of the different theories that are out there about, well, what happened? How did we get here? What's going on? Often it's linked to a cataclysmic event. So that in our past, as humans, as one, we went through something global, a huge catastrophe. And it's easy to throw around that talk to say, oh, there was a global flood and it was really bad. But imagine as a human being, this is what we have to do when we look at the past, is not just say, well, these people fought this war and then they went through this and etc. Stop for a moment, put yourself in that position as a living, breathing human being with a heart. How frightening would that be for the whole world as you know it to just collapse? It's like the worst doomsday event, post apocalyptic world you could imagine. That's going to do something to your psyche.
yeah.
So, what we have here is a situation where it appears that humanity went through an absolute cataclysm that just went and destroyed their psyches and went to epigenetic proportion where now it's passed down not just in story and art and memory, like don't forget this celestial alignment. Don't forget if you see this in the sky, there's signs and warnings in the sky. It's like, please, post generations, don't forget this. Run, also that goes through epigenetically. So it becomes part of your DNA to have these different thoughts and fears. And the new science on that is quite interesting about how those things can genetically express. And so you'll forget things. Now, what happens when people are traumatized as well is they go through and they have to like either repeat the cycle of abuse or they have to go in the cyclical way to break the cycle. Either way, it puts you trapped into a cycle. And you have to keep repeating the past and repeating the past in an effort to try to fix what happened. And if you see that through maybe like a Joseph Campbell and his talk on the monomyth, you see this over and over again. How we express ourselves in our art and story is we tell the same story over and over again. It just has a different look, a different cultural connotation. But at the end of the day, it's the same story of like a surprise, a call to adventure, and then you pass through the threshold from the known world, the safe, the known, to a very scary unknown world, and then ultimate death or some sort of problem where you have to face the ordeal and then you're born again. And then you have to go through with that knowledge and you start that over again. And we keep going through that cycle over and over again in every way. So I think that's our subconscious trying to tell us, remember. Don't forget, remember. And I think that's why so many people are interested in things like the ancient past and art and music and different cultures, is we're all trying to look and see what's similar with each other, not necessarily what's different, because the hero with a thousand faces, okay, it's one archetype, many different faces, and they can be interesting and fun. And that's why we like these stories over and over again. But after a while, we have to remove the mask and we have to look more deeply and say, what is this trying to tell us? And there's a clear message in my view there.
I agree. I have a hypothesis that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 is actually two different creation stories. That there was a group of beings, bipedals, they call the 6 day people. I think Gary Wayne did a pretty good job on describing them, but there was a cataclysm that happened to the earth, and then we pick up the story in Genesis 2 of now the different God. I don't know if it's the Elohim, I don't know if it's the Anunnaki, but it seems like the experimentation is with the Adamu, who is without a female partner, and the story is different and it's where we base reality upon, which your book, The Anunnaki Connection, clearly shows that the thoughts of Michael Heisner is one who I was thinking as well, and Stitchin, that no, it has a resemblance to what happened, but that's not what really happened.
Right. I agree with that. I think Sitchin is a great example of people who are looking for this information. Something resonates, but he's again put a different mask on this particular face. And so the story's real, there's something there, but the mask is a little different. And he used the mask, so to speak, of say 1960s spaceship technology, things that he was familiar with. He was a product of that science fiction
Yes.
time. And so he rewrites the narrative where these entities are aliens from a different planet getting aboard spaceships and they're mining and they're doing all of these things that are very material in their appearance. And so you have that. And then you have somebody who says, well, how do we rebuke that? What do we do? Like how about we just do the opposite? So literally Michael Heiser says, Dr. Michael Heiser, rest his soul. I mean, he is passed now. So this is not
Yeah.
at all to speak ill of him. This is just a general.
I interviewed him a couple of times.
He knew what he was talking about and he
Yeah.
was excellent. It's just the
Yeah.
problem I've had with his view is that he built a bit of a side hustle on sitchiniswrong.com. And while that's fantastic because he did point out inconsistencies, it's a little bit like, okay, now you've actually put yourself out there as it's this or it's this. Well, now we're locked in this like Hegelian dialectic where if I come out and say, how about we talk about the Anunnaki? People will say, oh, great. Is it like Sitchin? And if I say, not really, oh, well, then it's wrong because
It's
they
like,
only know like Dr. Heiser. And if I come out and maybe a different platform, we're talking about the Anunnaki and it's Dr. Heiser kind of cult of personality. And I start saying something that may seem a little less than that. It's like, oh, well, then you're wrong. So it's like, there could be a third way or a fourth way. We don't know. The point is not to pick sides yet. We only know the tip of the iceberg. There are thousands of tablets that have not been translated. And there are more tablets than Egyptian papyri because they lasted longer. The papyri were organic and they've since gone. So we have a fraction of information. It should be exciting and we should be trying to discover more, which they are, but there's a limited amount of people who are able to read these effectively. So their solution, of course, has been
Do you think
AI.
humans have the capacity or capability, Heather, of being able to suddenly start a society? By that I mean you have laws of governance, you have society norms of which, are passed down. Or and I find that in, hard to accept because it seems like we are creatures that we mimic that which we see. Or was there some other intervention that assisted us to that point, particularly where Sumer was concerned?
That's a great question because that's actually the big question right there is how was it that civilization, so to speak, as we define it, happened within a historic blink of an eye in the course of like 200 years. That's it. We
Literally.
go literally, we
Yeah.
go from semi-settled hunter-gatherers to having rules and professions and measurements and time and science and medicine and I mean very advanced systems really. And how do we do that? And so the question being are we able to do that? Well, the answer is yes, because we did. But how often did we do it? We did it once. So so now we did it, but what is the probability or the likelihood of us doing that over millennia? Well, it's very low, because out of all of the years that we're aware of, we did it once in one place, one time, and then it's grown since then. But
Yeah.
that's strange, isn't it? So that leads you to obviously question like what happened there that didn't happen tens of thousands of years ago. What happened there? And that is why it's one of the most fascinating areas of research that I just, I've been
You've
enthralled
written
with.
numerous books. I mean, yeah, and that's why I wish, you can almost do the Spock mind meld thing. It's like, 'cause, I got these questions like, um, so in which I'm in agreement with it. Who are the Anunnaki? I mean, I have read that, where I come from, the Judeo-Christian upbringing, primarily the Pentecostal side of it, but we were taught that the Elohim, well, that's God. It's just another name for God, and God can be Yahweh and whatever. But the Anunnaki, who are they?
Well, that's a really good question too, because people will say, well, they're gods. Well, we're talking about gods of Sumer, and we're talking about gods then later of Babylon, and I mean we're talking about Mesopotamian gods, and
Yeah.
so this isn't a small time period. This is a very long time, thousands of years of just these gods being present, and so knowing that. Different cultures after different wars and takeovers come in and they imbue the ideas differently. Yes, cuneiform stayed around, but the culture shifted how things were understood. And so, if you were to ask, say, a Sumerian who were the Anunnaki, they may have a very different answer to that than, say, the Assyrians, who also view the Anunnaki. So, we have to look very carefully. And what I try to do is go as far back as I can because I'm trying to find the beginnings of this. That is not to say that over progress and time that people weren't able to understand it more, study it, and expand, and then therefore they may be more right. But it's hard to wade through that clutter. And for me, I'm trying to find the purest information that I can. And that requires me to go to Sumer in particular. So that's when we're going into, instead of it being like Enki and Enlil, we have like A and all of these different, proto Anunnaki, if you will. It's so if you go that far back and you look, it appears to be that these are gods, and that's the general consensus is these are just the Sumerian gods. But then you have to maybe also consider what is a god. This is
Good
where it gets to
question.
be phenomenological and ontological and a little, it can lose people because it is a little deeper, but it's important that we look at those definitions because something like say a demon, because they had demons. What were demons though? This is a whole different thing. So entities, I like to refer to them as discarnate entities. That way we don't have a moral judgment on it. Not because we shouldn't judge that a demon's bad, because we can know that things are not good. But in order to fully wade through it, it's good to just sort of reduce it to its lowest common denominator mathematically and just say, okay, we have these discarnate entities, whatever they may be. And then we have what are being told to us are gods, but they also act in a way that are very human and they do things on earth and they're very real and in the moment and they rule. And then you look at these other entities that I write about called the Apkallu that are described very differently, which they're like semi biological. That's very clear that they're semi biological. So they're part organic, part spirit. They're something else. They're like an in between. They're even depicted as much by being winged entities. Sometimes they're called the genie, and that's where we get jinn. So now we're getting towards messenger beings, demons, this sort of thing. But so we have those spirits, and then we have the ruler, and they're often referred to as Lord. So, like we would say, the Lord, but then we also in our language say, like, the landlord or Lord of the Manor. So we can kind of get those titles, and so if I were to look back on text, like say thousands of years from now, and I see things that we've talked about, I may be talking about how cool my landlord was because, he let me slide and then someone could read that and say, wow, the God of the house that she, worshipped, was the temperature, was cold. I mean, like you could, so there's
Yeah.
translation and interpretation. And so we have some translations, but how may we interpret that? And so from a lot of my research, I've seen that if you go back, it starts with these entities being visitors from elsewhere. And this is what the people themselves say. And they also say that they were referred to as the black-headed ones. And that's important to note because that would mean that the Anunnaki didn't have the dark hair. However, that whether they had brown hair, or red hair, or white, who knows? But they didn't have black hair. And that's important because if you say you're, a group of redheads and then another redhead group comes, you wouldn't say, well, the redheaded ones, because why would you point that out? You would just think it's common. So that's a clue. So these people were from elsewhere. They were coming and they were definitely the part Sitchin gets right here for sure is the enslavement aspect of it. These were very oppressive beings, and they were oppressive because they were trying to get people to work to cultivate the land. So they're like the gods of agriculture.
Hmm.
But if you think about this too, and then of course you get into the whole dynamics of the story where there's Enki who is like, oh, you're treating these people unfairly, and there's a rebellion and all of this. But if you think about that, just at its most common, if you could imagine a post-cataclysmic world where there may have been a group of individuals who escaped, and they escaped that great flood, and they escaped with the technologies, and those technologies would have been agriculture. We don't always have to see technology as like computers. Technology is a machete. That was a huge innovation. If anyone ever has read Guns, Germs, and Steel, you know that the way we understand this is very different. So agriculture is an enormous technology to be able to do that. Irrigation, building canals, which was part of what they did. When you could introduce that to somebody, first of all, the control opportunity is huge. If I were to go to somebody and say, guess what? I'm going to put this little seed here. I'm going to do this, that, and the other according to the movements of the stars. And you watch, we're going to have food. We'll have a surplus of it. Okay, now not only was that amazing, but I'm feeding, I'm providing. If there's a language barrier, that's even better because you have to keep that secret information secret, but you also have to communicate. Otherwise, you can't enslave the people. So you have a priest class, they're the scribe class. They're the ones that can mediate between the gods and the base of the pyramid. And so they keep them apart. And so that's a perfect opportunity. Of course, now you have a hierarchical system. When you look at early worship in that sense, it was always about burnt offerings, but specifically the burnt offerings, not like television would say you throw an animal on the altar and burn it and just say some prayer and walk away. No, this was about food. They had recipes even that are recorded over what God wanted their food done a certain way. There was no boiling, or like no boiling because they wanted it on braziers. Because, well, it tastes better. Would you like to have like a boiled chicken or a barbecue chicken? I mean, so
Jehovah
very,
liked it burnt flesh. He said it was a sweet smelling aroma to his nose.
yeah. So see, these are interesting things that like start to come up when you look at it more human like. If you try to put
Hmm.
yourself in that position for a moment and not just think of it as a story. So it puts us in this position where you have an oppressive group of people coming who are displaced, but who are also lifting up humanity because of all of this. And then you have the rebellion, of course, and it gets all into that. Now, my interest is in these Apkallu. And if you Google Anunnaki, you'll see a lot of images, and including the Apkallu, like they don't get differentiated well enough. But the Apkallu were older than the Anunnaki, and they could be seen as the Anunnaki's sages. They're associated with the
Wow.
Pleiadian star system. They're called the sages, the seven sages. And so they were the ones that taught that those early people what they know. At least
Do
that's
you think
they
they were galactic travelers?
That's a very good question. And I'm open to it being I personally don't know that it's galactic in the sense that they're able to jump around from rock to rock. I personally believe that it's more of a dimensional component,
Yeah,
that it's
yeah,
something that they were able to tap into then through different religious mechanisms and spiritual technologies. So whether it be, meditation techniques or psychedelics or whatever, music, even resonance, all of the things that we may think of as spiritual sciences. I think that's what they were using for their worship. But their worship, remember, was that means to work for. It was their great work. So what were they doing? They were building a society. They were doing this. They were worshiping these entities, this Akalu. And I believe what goes on over time, and this is what is depicted in this whole Gil Rite, where you see like this christening happening. So, because when you look at the king's list, you'll see a name of a ruler who was like the Lord of that time, of that day, but assigned to them is a sage. Each one has a sage assigned. Over time, when actual like people kind of just lifespan and different things happen, you start to see that like go away. You don't see the sage, and it just merges into one, as though now it's like, uh, in my view, I believe that the Anunnaki, these were human entities who were inspired. And inspired from inspirari doesn't mean just like, hey, I got an idea. It means you have a spirit blown into you from a deity. So these are possessed. This was like a possession. So these are like the avatars of these
mm,
entities. And so these entities, I believe, have been here since the beginning. I think these are what people call the ultra terrestrials, and the Anunnaki were the carriers when the cataclysm's coming. These are the individuals that carry forth that and spread it into the world. And so, even after their long lifespans and their greatness would be over, they've now opened the door for these for avatars to happen all over, so that now that we have a new type of religion, like a set up like a mystery school where we have all these different rites and this different social structure, and it just carries on. And that's sort of the link where we get into like occultism, where it becomes the mysterium, and there's only an elite few that can still contact the sages, sometimes called the brotherhood, sometimes many different names. But I think it's the same system.
wow, you have just two things I was thinking. I had never thought that if you brought to a group of people a shovel, that that would be considered a gift from God. Because if you're digging with a hand or with something, suddenly you now have a shovel, you've got technology.
Absolutely. And
I
it could
mean,
feed them, it could take care of
yes,
them, but now you can manipulate them and you say, I am God, worship me as God. Now, what
bingo.
happens when the Great Rebellion happens and Enki and other rebellious type figures say, why do they get in trouble at all? They get in trouble because they feel bad for the people and say, I'm going to do what? I'm going to share the secret. I'm going to say to you, this is not their God. You can do this too. You have all the power inside of you. You just have to know it. So it's an awakening. It's they're sharing the christening, the higher consciousness. That is the great rebellion. That's why in many different hierarchical structures like this, you take an oath to never tell the secret of secrets. That
You
is the
just gave me
arcana.
something that it's hitting me. When you were talking about this rebellion, it could easily be interpreted as the rebellion in heaven,
Yes.
Satan, Lucifer against God.
Yes.
And you see, and this leads me into the next question. When I first wrote you, one of the things that has always um, been curious to me, and I would love your perspective. So I believe that, the Abrahamic religions that Abram came from as it says in the book of Genesis, which was in the country of the Chaldees, which was Sumer.
Mm.
And so he would have known who Enki was. It says his family worshiped Inanna, the moon goddess.
Yeah.
So, Heather, the thing that has always puzzled me, so he gets this calling from a strange god, an entity that is apparently can't be seen, but has mind control that he picks up, goes out into the desert, and meets this. I don't know what it is. It's called God today, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. But in my mind, I'm going, wait a minute. So if the Sumer never wrote about it, we can't read it in their tablets. We never read about a Yahweh. Who is this God? Or
Uh,
who is it?
Ooh, well, this is where we get into a lot. This is where it gets really,
This is fun, isn't
it's great.
it? I
I
wish we had
love
some
it.
tea. We'd be sitting
I
here going,
know.
yeah.
I love this because this is the kind of stuff that gets me in big trouble all the time. I'm gonna get so much hate. But you know, it is what it is. I didn't write
It
it.
is. It is what it
I'm
is.
just passing it along. Like I grew up Catholic. I still consider myself Christian. I'm like a Catholic with no home at this point. I mean, like we can't, I, organized religion. It's it's a problem. So, but and I don't at all judge anybody who has a faith like that. It's this isn't about faith. It's about just looking at the written record and
Yeah.
all of this, like trying to take a scientific viewpoint. And so and I always say the interesting part is I was more, I was less spiritual anyway. I was spiritual when I was younger, but I was the only person I think that went into college and then came out like a lot more spiritual. Most people come out a little less spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah.
They did
Less.
the opposite to me because once I started learning I was like, wait, there is more to this world. And so, so it's just, you have to keep an open mind, just not so open that your brains fall out, as they used to say. But I think that when it comes to what you're speaking of, if you remember the origin of Moses, his wife, she was from a southern region. So there is evidence in the mainstream literature that suggests that she was already worshiping this particular deity from this particular area, which would have been a storm god and a god of war and a god that presided on top of mountains. Well,
Lord of
clearly
hosts.
yes, yes, yes. And so he goes into this desert and he finds out about this, or at least has a personal know. So he already would know about it. He would already know. But there's knowing and there's gnosis. There's knowing like the mind, and then there's direct experience. Through the burning bush, he had a direct experience, which is far different than the religious points of view before, because now he could say, this is a personal God. This is my God. I am that I am. It's something completely different. So he was able to turn away from that old system and say, now I have experienced firsthand. I'm awake. I've had like an awakening similar to the experiences that, I study with people who do DMT and have these encounters, that when you come out from an experience like that, it trumps anything else because now you've had the experience
They're
personally.
real.
Yes, they're real.
I've
So,
talked to them. I've met them, but
yeah, well, we'll have to talk about that. But that's the thing. It's so he goes out and he adopts this completely different worldview and completely different religion and worships this deity. And you're right to say there's not really mention of Yahweh that way until later. I think the very first mention that I'm aware of is an Egyptian papyri, actually.
I think
And
you're
that
right.
gets associated with that. So it's like a retroactive thing because what they're trying to do is understand what happened, and they're trying to now syncretize their own faith. They're trying to understand this sort of religion that they've now made, saying that okay, retroactively, this was always the God, like to try to erase the others. But you can't do that because we know the truth, and the truth is Yahweh is a newer sort of deity. Now again, it could be like, yeah, but it's all the same. It's just one God. Well, I mean, then there wouldn't be wars fighting over one god or the other. There is a difference between the gods. And even if it's not real, and this is something very important I like to point out, anyone who listens to this could say, this is wild. This isn't real. These are fairy tales. And that doesn't even matter. Even if it was all just a epiphenomenon of our brain, our imaginary friends, as people like to condescend, we're acting in such a way that it is real and it becomes real then. And that's the concept of an egregore, is we can create the god and that god will actually kill us or not or whatever, like our wars and our life. Like I dealt with this in my book Evil Archaeology when I discussed possession, and someone could say, well, demons aren't real, you can't be possessed. Okay, fine, but we live in a world where if someone believes they are possessed, if they act as though they're possessed, if they truly live in that way, they could kill people in the name of a demon. That to me, if my loved one was killed in the name of a demon from an individual human being that claimed to be possessed, that's evil. And that makes the demon real enough for me because it had a material consequence in my life. So, yeah, what's real? I don't know. That's an ontological question, and we can talk about that. But for a working practical purpose, it's like algebra. We have to have an X on that
Yeah.
variable just so we can progress through the conversation. So, yes, gods
I
and
was
their
in the
names are
deliverance
important.
ministry. I casted out a few demons, or it's I have a different perspective on it. it's like, the God that Abraham met out there, and the reason why I contend that it was not the same God of Genesis 2 or 1 was that this God that Abraham worshiped, and subsequently Moses, as we get into the children of Israel, etc., was this God that Abram met. He said he wanted to put his mark in humanity, and he was going to have a chosen race, and they would be circumcised. So the God of Genesis 2 obviously is not the Genesis God of Genesis 9, because if God had created man in his image, that would have already been taken care of. And so it's
Right.
his mark in humanity. Now, I interpret that as that, so is there a potential manipulation of DNA, or is there something else going on here?
No,
you
that's
know,
great. That's a great line of thinking, and yeah, I want to follow those through lines because I have not looked at it from that perspective actually, and like the Genesis 1 and 2 being different theologically like that. That's interesting.
the
That's
fourth
really interesting. I
chapters of Genesis 1, the last four chapters should be the first chapter, first four verses of chapter 2.
Okay.
It talks about a destruction that hit the earth, which Golby Tepe said that this comet, whatever they saw coming, they buried their monuments because they knew it was coming.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so and you think about things like the Noah, you know, they knew they could see this. They were being told by God to plan something's going on. Now, in it's hard because again, the story goes Noah builds this big boat and they put all the animals on the boat and it's just great. And so people try to figure out how to push and shoehorn the idea in that how can we make that possible. So they'll say things like, well, they had vials of DNA and then they biologically created the
I've heard
animals.
that theory. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, Occam's razor here. Let's move back, and we don't have to go far because the Sumerian texts discuss what happened, and they actually they translate it a little bit differently, where it is not that he brings all of the animals, but he specifically brings the animals of the steppe. A very different thing to consider, and it's so important because what the story really paints is that of a breakaway civilization that was at one point living on the steppe, near the steppe, so somewhere in Eurasia or otherwise, where these individuals. Imagine now if you had a family or a being. Oh, and to say this, the earlier texts don't say that these were all genetic family members either that escaped. That these were hand-picked, the heads of all the sciences and arts. And so if you this all seems to be like the makings of a break civilization where it's like, hey, we know this is going to happen. Come together, let's get our best agriculturalist, let's get our best healer, and now we're going to get the animals of the steppe because we need to survive. If we're going to be nomadic, we need to make sure we have the animals. And if you know anything about the culture of the steppe people, they can go far on very little because of their practices with bloodletting. So they drink the blood of the animal. So it's sad, but they drink the blood of the animal because it's nutrition, but they don't kill the animal so they can keep the animal as a resource. Very into dairy because you can have cheese and dairy and still not kill the animal. And so there's all of these different things that point to a different situation than maybe just the boat itself. And there's also varying accounts from other people in far off ways of a very similar story, like in India. And so, could it be that other people from all of this breakaway civilization, they had their fights, they went other different ways and different belief sets and different methodologies and spread some sense of this pre-flood or antediluvian culture somewhere. I mean, those are the through lines I try to look at because there's a lot of scientific evidence to support human migration patterns that are a little less typical than what we've been led to believe. And that's usually like a no-no to talk about that. And
Mm.
that's always a clue to me too. Like, why aren't we allowed to ask those questions? And in my new book, I do that head on, and I cite the work of Dr. Reich out of Harvard, who's a geneticist that has done amazing work on following human DNA patterns and who went where and when. And his work is very controversial, but not at the same time because it's so mainstream. He's head of the genetics lab at Harvard still, and he's had to go out when he does speaking and sometimes qualify what he says with, hey, look, I know this is it's going to like let people down, but the truth is the truth. The facts are the facts.
I want to know if the God of the Homo sapiens is the same God of the Homo the Neanderthals or the Cro-Magnon. I
Right.
mean, it and if the record's right, Heather, on this, it says that Homo sapiens mated and integrated with all these other genesis of man. We seem to somehow come out on top. I mean, so was that by natural selection or was that by manipulation?
Well, that is a good question. And I like to, again, try to keep it simple and as simple as it can be. And if we say genetic manipulation,
Yeah,
well,
and then I know people begin to go thinking that, it's like some scientist with big
exactly,
head going,
though. And that's exactly the thing to sort of like push back on because I used to have a German Shepherd. I always adopt, but I did get as a pet, as a gift, a breeder who was a friend of mine gave me one of her puppies, and it was a beautiful, purebred, long-haired German Shepherd with all these papers talking about how fancy it was. And that is genetic manipulation. Breeding, just simply like a dog breed. So if we say genetic manipulation, it doesn't have to be the Sitchin thing where there's like the cool Anunnaki statue looking guys and they have the beakers and
and
they're
their
pouring
hands
like
all
so,
going,
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
take a
no,
little
it
bit of
can just
this.
simply be actual selective breeding.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, if we were like a so-called slave species of the gods, unfortunately, the dark truth is that masters of slaves do engage in selective breeding programs, and so whoever would have been subjugated would have been subject to selective breeding by the qualities and things they may exhibit by their so-called masters. It's a very dark thing, but it's a very natural thing, unfortunately, and you don't need to have like spaceship technology and things to facilitate it. And that is actual genetic manipulation and is technology because, well, I mean, we're still learning about how to do any of that. And a
Yeah.
great example too are the Russian foxes. I forget which exact breed, but it's easily Googleable. They were doing a long time research project on these foxes, and over time they started to see that. They over so many generations they would get very docile and domesticated by themselves, but some of the things that you could control for or their coloring. As soon as an animal starts to get more domestic, they get piebald, they get white spots, they get more white. They're also you see more of the whites of their eyes. Their features get a little neotenized, more rounded, so they start to be different and docile. And so if you then select for that, you're selecting for docility. You're selecting for someone to be more compliant with you. And so it's literally like what we've done to wolves who are out there, living naturally and they're dangerous and they have their own ways. And then there's, a pug, so like that's science, that's technology, and you would be able to leverage that in a selective breeding program. So we're more like, I would say, the livestock of the gods that way, which is definitely manipulation. But that's my view, at least, and that's because of a lot of the ancient um, focus on animal husbandry and
Yeah.
how it was
Which was a big deal. I mean,
huge, huge.
yeah.
It was a huge technology that with the agriculture. So it was part and parcel to what made us a great civilization as a human species.
So when we think about us as a civilization, and what are we, the fifth or the sixth? I forget. The sixth great civilization. Um, when I was reading your book, how far do Homo sapiens go back? I mean, is it 200,000 years or is it longer? And is it possible, it's a two-part question, that there is yet a race, a species that we have no idea about, but there very well still could be here. They've advanced in a way that, well, they use technology in a sense how we would use a television.
That's a great question. Yeah,
We got to
you
do this again, Heather. We got to have come back and
Oh, I'll come back anytime. I love speaking to you. You're very well versed in this. It's not enough people that I've spoken with have such a deep level of knowledge on this subject. So, and an
thank
open
you.
mind too. And so, like I said, I've gone on to a lot of different programs where, because of the Christian element of it, which I get called like all kinds of things, and it's unfortunate because I'll say, "But I'm a Christian." And they're like, "Yeah, you're not." It's like,
No, you're
okay,
not.
well,
No,
I
you're
don't know. I was told once, "Well, you have red hair, and that's like Hecate." I'm like, Hecate is not real. Like, I mean, it's a myth, but like, we don't have pictures of Hecate. Like, okay, so to each
not.
their own. So, yeah, but it's fun. But to answer your question, the Homo sapiens, yes, we go back that far, but there's also Homo sapiens sapien, like man who knows who he knows. So it's like this other kind of point of reference in the evolutionary form of how we kind of have awakening, like what some people refer to as the big brain bang. And that is also an interesting thing to consider when you're talking about stuff that happens in like a blink of an eye. So
Yeah.
when civilization happens in just say like 200 years, and also I want to qualify too that some people may take exception to us discussing the idea of a civilization per se, but civilization is just used in an academic context to kind of clarify what we mean by a people. So,
Yeah.
yes, in Sumer, in these areas, there were people who had pottery and language and a vivid culture. Everything was that way. So we're not saying that was no groups of people getting together and having a great life and contributing. It's simply that when we have civilization, that is specifically sciences, professions that are passed down. We have art, we have mechanisms of control. It's a whole different thing. And so in that context, there's that 200-year span in Sumer where it's like boom, we have civilization. Well, likewise what happened too with the human brain is this big brain bang that they say. And there we just don't know how that happened. And that is another interesting area of research. Some people have their theories as they would. Richard Wrangham, a primatologist, he has a theory of he refers to as catching fire. Very good theory there, where it's about how cooking our food made it more bioavailable, and so then it was able to make us healthier and have bigger brains, and those things could be passed on. There's also the stoned ape theory, where like Terence McKenna popularized that, saying, "Well, we did magic mushrooms because people were following the paths of ungulates, and if then on cow patties, the mushrooms pop up, and you have a whole
Although I
host."
dig that kind of
It's
personally, I just
fun.
don't really,
I don't I love it. I think it's fun, but it's
yeah.
also it couldn't be passed down genetically
Who
because you
is the
could.
doctor who thought we that we advanced by the eating the brains of
Oh, I
I have
forget
this
that
book
one.
right over here on my shelf. It's a text, it's right there. It's called
Interesting.
The Beginnings of the Beginnings. And
Mm.
his theory is that as simians, as we were evolving, that one group of simians who attacked another group started eating the brains, and suddenly there was, like you said, the big bang of the brain thing happened. Like our cranium suddenly. I'll
Oh
send it
yeah,
to you on that if you like to read it. It's a
I
great.
would. I because my question would be how. What about like the mad so-called mad cow disease? What about
Yeah, yeah,
prions and
yeah,
or prions? So that would be interesting. But I love those attempts to figure out. I mean, there's
yeah.
aquatic ape theory, but in terms of the brain, I think my favorite one has to do more so with the DHA availability and our move towards eating seafood and how we're really because that's something that
Oh,
affects the fetal brain development because that's the key. You could be stoned all day, but your kids may their consciousness isn't expanded, right? However, there is like a metacultural component where if it's part of your culture, you could pass that thing down over time, but it would take a long time and then still isn't going to change your genetic makeup. But what would change it would be the availability of DHA and omega 3 fatty acids in the brain of an infant, making larger brains.
I hadn't
And
thought
s-
about that.
and so the movement towards, and also when you look at the very most archaic religious viewpoints, as well as the Apkallu, the Onas, when they're called that, I think by I forget the author. It's an Egyptian author. Talked about them and called them like the Onas. They were looked at as fishmen. These are
Yeah,
the original entities that come out of the water, and there's all this like saltwater, primordial, Mary, Mother, Marine, etc. So I happen to think that Richard Wrangham is spot on when it comes to bioavailability and catching fire, but I also think that probably more so is the idea of fish being integral because it directly impacts the brain development of a baby, and if you do that enough over time, then the baby's brain and head gets so big that we have like the quintessential problems that we as humans face, which is we have to have our babies younger than they can be, on their own. Like when a giraffe has a baby, they just get up and run around. We can't do that. We sort of have this in between time where our babies have to come out with soft heads, and we have to take care of them for a while. They're not ready because we couldn't house them in our womb because their brains got so big, their heads got so big, and that's, I believe, from my personal pet theory, is the more fish oriented diet. But to answer your question more directly, this idea of there being other uh, beings that maybe could still be here. I know people will point to like maybe a Sasquatch type thing or whatever, or maybe that they never left or that we had some sort of interaction. I think that the Epic of Gilgamesh speaks to that
Yes,
like
it does.
completely.
Yeah.
When you have Enkidu, he is described as like a living with the animals, very hairy, very beast-like, very formidable in his appearance. And then you have Gilgamesh, who is very human. He lives within the walls of the city, and he is sent. They send the temple prostitute to Enkidu, and the temple prostitute meets him where the watering hole is, where the gazelles. And so the animals weren't afraid of Enkidu, kind of indicating he's part of the natural landscape. But then she entices him and convinces him that, hey, you want some of this? You got to come to that city with me. And then he does. But then what happens is they bathe him and they make him human. And the idea of human being different than animal is very important. It kind of falls into this Nietzschean idea that we're seeing now with transhumanism and this sort of thing, where you have a man of nature and he goes in and it gets humanized. So the culture is what made him human, the shaving, the clothes. And then he had to prove himself along the way. And it's just this whole like bromance, obviously an epic tale, the epic tale. But it hints at this idea that coexisting at one point were a different type of human and a so-called civilized human, but that they interacted and then they had these, sort of this life that coincided, and I believe that Enkidu would have been one of those different types of humans. And now, which kind, that would be difficult to say, but I believe that that is an early tale of the meeting of two, the uncivilized man, so to speak, and the civilized man. And the concept of nature too is, that's I think what we're really talking about because we have, like you said about your dog, we have animals, and we are
Yeah.
animals, and then there's humans, and we're different. And then there's gods. And this is where Nietzsche, kind of spoke on this in a very important way. And a lot of people cite Nietzsche, of course. It's very cliche. And a lot of people are pro Nietzsche or anti. My view on this is that he was brilliant and troubled. And the way that you look at his work is, you can't look at it like he was right or wrong or good or bad. It's just, it is what it is. So when he said God is dead, that's usually where people stop and they go, look, God is dead. So we're better than that now. Or they say, oh, God is dead. And that's terrible. And the jerk. Well, what he really said was, God is dead, and we have killed him. He laments, who are we but murderers of all murderers? Who's going to wipe the blood off of our hands? What kind of sacred games and amusements will we have to create to sort of, wash this off of our hands? But then he goes further and asks, and I'm paraphrasing greatly, but he asks, must we not become gods if only to appear worthy? So, what we're really looking at in that full quote is this image of somebody who is having an existential crisis where they realize that because we have gone into this materialist world, we as humans killed the idea of God. And now we have a problem because what are we going to do? Where are our ceremonies? How are we going to forgive sins? What are we going to do? And then the question, which is a little dangerous, is he doesn't say we have to become gods. He asks in this lament, like, well, are we going to have to do this now? We're going to take the throne. And are we ready for that? And that is the fundamental problem that we're facing in this like postmodern world is we feel that since we've gotten rid of God or gods or whatever, that now the only choice we have is to mourn the loss of the gods and then just wither away into an existential abyss, or will triumph and will become God. And that's the problem. You see the Ubermensch come out of that thinking that we're the overman, we're better than that, we are transhumanists, we're going to ascend, we're going to go to this other place. And it flies in the face of Greek humanism, which was such an important thing in our Western tradition because it gave us hope that there was a middle way, that it's okay if there's a God up high, and it's okay if there's animals below, and we are in between. And there's this mobility that we have. We can be the custodians of the animals and the custodians of the world. We don't dominate them, we're the custodians, but we also can strive to do better. Because if our God is so far above us and we're just nothing, we're just oppressed. We're just going to always be in that state of oppression. We wouldn't have a Jesus figure where Jesus tries to make human God so that we can access God. And so having that rung on the like Jacob's ladder, we need a ladder, we need the rungs, we need to be able to ascend up in such a way, and people can get drunk
It
off that
is,
power.
and that's the crux to everything because us as a species, we perceive things that we're not up there as to, so we always look for a mediator in between. And,
Right.
I've spent 50 years in that religion, and it was quite amazing to me because I finally came down to it and I said, well, so what's really going on here? I mean, there was a time before what we call Christianity, Judeo-Christianism, and those gods were as real to those people as the gods of our gods today.
Yeah.
But those gods eventually died. And I don't know if it was because, of Alexander the Great and his Hellenism approach that, all religions are okay. We'll accept you all, because in the end, it's still there's something that we can't comprehend. Or is it as your next book? I want you to talk a little bit, the Anunnaki Revelation. Is this a predetermined plan that we're in this cycle that no matter how we try to get out of it, you can't get out of it?
Well, that is a, yeah, it's a daunting prospect because
It
it
is.
leads
It's
us to it is because it can be very discouraging, which is why people have an existential crisis because it can feel overwhelming. And I think overall we're in that state right now. When you look at the state of affairs in the world, people feel very hopeless. And
Nihilism is everywhere.
oh, it's so bad. And then the next step philosophically after nihilism is absurdism. And we're starting to see some of that where everyone's just like, ah, whatever. And they're just making fun of everything. And there's a detachment of reality. And there has been pushback, though. And I think more and more people, I'm actually hopeful because more and more people are talking about how what we're dealing with is a spiritual war. And that to me is it. Once we can recognize, yes, there's a material world, but it's the material world. Are we just the material? Are we just the animals, or are we just, are we vessels, or what is this? When you divorce yourself from that and you believe that there is something higher, that we are spirits, and that yes, there is a materiality to this reality, but that's not the limit of it, that there's so much more. It can be hopeful, but it's hard to be hopeful because then you get the flim flam stuff where it's like, well, just, do some yoga and ascend and it'll all be okay, which can also be dangerous because then you give up the world in front of you for this promised land that is spiritual and it's very actually nihilistic as well. So there is a middle ground, I think. And I think the more people that are looking at this and coming out and saying, you know what, this is a spiritual battle and we need to fight it right now here on earth in the material realm right now. And it's happening though. I'm very hopeful. And like discussions like this I think are key. Shows like yours are key because we're breaking through that clutter and we're being able to reach people to say it's not what you think. There's so much more to this world and maybe we don't have it figured out. Maybe we don't know exactly who this deity was and what they're trying to do or whatever, but the fact that we're even looking, that's the start, and we will find out too. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Arthur C. Clarke classic, Childhood's End. I would
Yes,
highly recommend. It's
yes.
sci-fi, but he knew a lot of
You
things
knew a
that were
lot.
going on behind the scenes. And that's pretty much that's what I'll have to say about that. So recommend that book for anyone who wants to see probably
Check
what's
it
really
out.
going on. Yeah.
See, I believe, and we went way over, and I apologize,
Oh,
but
I
this
it's
is
totally fine. I'm used to long stretches, so this is a little talk.
um, this one. You see, I have always been of the nature that humans, we seek the supernatural. That's why we seek God, whether it's a goddess, whether it's a god. What we seek is that supernatural aspect that we can recognize that there is something greater than ourselves. And within that, there is hope. Because if
Yes.
you have a God that's supernatural, that can actually do supernatural things, well, then there's great hope for that God nurturing us. And I think somewhere along the way we lost it, but I think we're, like you said, I see more and more people coming back to the spirituality, not the religion. They want that spiritual experience.
Yeah, I do too. And you see that with people joining like the Orthodox Catholic faith now, a lot of Sufis. I mean, it doesn't matter which flavor. It's what people are doing is they're looking for those sort of more mystical approaches to their
Yeah.
religion, however it looks, because they feel, I'm sure like many people feel that when you go to your average church that maybe you've gone to for a while, you walk in and there's nothing mystical anymore.
Nothing
It's
there.
just, it could be a great place too. You could go find fellowship and community and it's a great time, but there may be something missing. There's not the mysterium. There's not the like you said, just supernatural component to it. So you come out still hungry and you don't know why you're hungry because you went to church. You're in church. You're doing all the right things. You're singing the songs. You're partaking in this. And then after a while, if you're not feeling fulfilled, how easy it is to then say, well, there's nothing to this religion and I'm not religious anymore and forget spirituality. And now the bitterness sets in. And now not only do you say, it's not for me, you say, and you know what? It's not for anyone. And anyone who believes in anything like that's just stupid because I'm immature and I'm mad because I've been hurt. People are hurt because their faith has turned their back on them because they turned their back on the mystery.
My wife and I was asked to leave a church because I was praying in tongues, and then during the worship, and they literally came in and said, "We don't believe that part of the Bible or that part of the," and they asked us to leave, and
Mm.
that's when and that was well over a decade or so ago, and it told me that something was happening, um, and I think that I'd love to have another discussion with you another time because with all of this, AI is playing a role in this.
Yes, I have a book coming out next year
See, we've
about
got
that.
to get together because I have a feeling you and I could have a really good conversation on that
Yeah.
one.
Oh yeah, because AI is a big part of this too now. So it's
If
really
there's
gotten
one
things more
single
complicated.
existential threat to humanity, it is what we've invented.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And then the question too is, where do we get these ideas anyway?
Yeah, exactly. I
Where do we
mean,
get these? Where do we get these little downloads, if you will, of information? Who gives it, and where are we getting that? And that's a whole
my great
interesting,
grandmother from Germany, she didn't have any of these ideas. I got to tell you that at all. She didn't have them at all,
right? So we have another sort of remaking of civilization going on right before
don't
us,
we?
just in time for possibly another cataclysm. So I think that's something the elites are planning.
Well, and closing on this, I just, when we talked about Noah's flood, I
Mm.
mean, Ben Davidson over at Suspicious Observers, I forget what the new channel is, but I think that there is a natural effect that caused Noah's flood. I don't believe it was a god. I believe it was actually the poles flipped.
Oh yeah, no, I happen to believe that too
And I
as
think
well.
we're in the midst of that next great cataclysm. If it
Hmm.
goes in the cyclical 12,000 years, we're right there.
And the Kali Yuga,
Thank
as
you.
yep, that's
I,
what we're dealing with that now. But I think the only it's semantic differences, but I believe that that's God because I believe that God works through nature. So I think it is a God
yeah, I
event,
can see.
a God, would however
Yeah,
this is working. Because remember too, Yahweh's a storm God. A lot of
true.
these gods are able to, God's the little g, right? I mean,
Yeah,
discarnate entities that have the power to manipulate some different things. So,
they
and
do.
yeah, so, but definitely just the cycles. So I think they're wanting us to believe that this is all just man made. When they talk about climate change and it's very politicized, it's like, well, no, there is climate change, but what kind of climate change and why is it changing? What's going on? I believe personally, and I'll just leave you with this one. I think that it's a massive transfer of wealth. It's let's blame these people. It's just like what the Mayans and other civilizations have done. The priest class who thinks they're going to say to the people on the bottom of the pyramid, well, this eclipse and this bad weather is happening because you didn't give us enough of your, offspring. It's because you've not done enough. So, but they already knew it was going to happen. They just want to take from us so that they are the ones who have the resources to weather the storm.
Oh, you and I've got to talk some more on this one because there's like, and I can see in the chat room. Thank everybody in the chat room. I mean, it's the hearts are just going like it's like going
Oh, well, thank you.
24/7. They
That's
really
nice.
and loved you. Listen,
Oh,
and the best way you can do in supporting Dr. Lynn on this is subscribe to her channel. I left the link down there because that helps. But the other part too is to go out and buy the books. They're well worth the read. I'll testify to that. And I know that will help her. And why don't you send her a note over on her channel and just thank her for this time as well? Because Heather, it is just If I could, I'd shake your hand, but also at the same time, just love to give you a hug and just say thank you. Continue
Well,
the research because your work is helping men and women such as myself and helping us begin to see clarity and options.
well, that means a lot. Thank you so much because it can be a lonely world out here going against all these different ideas and ideologies and trying to find the truth. And sometimes the truth is not very popular. And sometimes we don't even know if it's the truth. We have to use discernment and we have to just pray that we are on the right track and that we'll find people who are like minded and can help us all along. And I thank you for the opportunity then to connect with yourself and other like minded individuals.
You have an open opportunity. You're part of this group here. And I just say on a personal side, when I was hearing you talk about, you see, I was been on my own since I was 15. And I know what it is to be homeless and to be out there. I never graduated from high school, but I've invented two payment systems as CEO. It never limited me. And when I hear your story, it just tells me there's a commonality amongst certain souls that we travel the same paths, and it's quite you feed us as we feed you, but and that's what I appreciate this, that you stuck to it, and while you are fulfilling your mission, that's all I got to say.
Well, I appreciate that. That really does mean a lot. And if my mission is to hopefully inspire others, and if my gift is just to the gift of gab to talk about some strange and interesting things, I know what it is to sometimes, be facing a world of real problems every day, like survival and problems, but then sometimes be able to know that your mind is doing something else, right? We have free minds, our bodies may be enslaved in such a way because of the systems and the things we're forced to do, but our minds can always be free if we believe they can be. And so I know that I was imprisoned in my own life, but I had something as simple as like Art Bell or any of these shows to listen to that got me thinking, and it helped me feel that I wasn't so trapped. And so if I could just be that to anybody else, to say, hey, here's some interesting ideas, let's look into this a little further. Free yourself, even if you have your podcast or something like earbuds in while you're at work or whatever. I think that's really important to just keep doing that work. But sometimes it feels a little frivolous in a world that we're living in now where everything's so dire. But so your words are very, very appreciated. And thank you so much for that encouragement. It does help me a lot.
Well, you got fans here, and Art Bell knew what he was talking about. I mean, it's just what I love about it is how destiny and fate, how they're conjoined twins, and how I see people your life and what you've brought to the world. And if that doesn't give humanity hope, I don't know what does. So, will you come back on again?
Anytime for as
I
long as you want.
Oh, I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to make use of that
Okay.
because I hope that we can, and I'll be more than happy to come on your channel,
That'd be great.
and we're going to help you grow that channel, and because you have a message that people need to hear, and you know what it is? It's a message of hope, Heather. So bless you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you in the chat room. You've been so kind. And again, just, I appreciate that. And have yourself a good day. I'll see you back on Friday. And again, make sure to check out Heather's channel, buy her books, and we'll have another session on this. So much love, everybody. Thank you, Heather. See you again real soon, everyone. So, as I learn how to pull the bus over to the edge.